All right, good morning. We are once again in the home of Coach Vince Dooley. Today is November the 15th, 2017, and I'm Jason Hasty, the Athletics History Specialist for the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library. This is the final installment in our oral history series with Coach Dooley. So thank you again, Coach, for having us into your home and sitting down talking to us.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It has stirred a lot of memories for me that I normally probably wouldn't think about some of the things because people normally don't ask me some of the questions you've asked me. So anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I hope that's a good thing. Well, today we're going to kind of branch out beyond your career in sports and talk about some of the things that you do outside of sports, particularly your interest in history and gardening, which I think you're very well known for. Certainly your interest in gardening is well known. So I want to start out talking a little bit about your career as a writer. You have written several books, starting back when you were a coach. You wrote a book on how to operate a running game as in a football for a football team. And now you've written your latest book, which is about the Civil War. This story is called "The Legion's Fighting Bulldog: The Civil War Correspondence of William Gaston Deloney and Rosa Deloney, 1853 to 1863." And it's a story of these two people, this couple, during the Civil War years and their experience. So, Coach, tell me a little bit about how you got it, why you write, what draws you writing, and then we'll kind of get into this new book of yours.
Well, I think it goes back to a long-time interest in history. I grew up actually during World War II as a youngster, knew exactly where I was when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Every night I would listen to the radio of what was going on. And I've always had an interest in history, though I finished in business. And after serving in the Marine Corps, I came back and was going to get a master's in business, which means a lot of economic courses, but a minor in history. So I took the history courses and enjoyed them so much that when I got to the economics course, it was like work. And if that's going to be a part-time thing, you've got to do something that you really enjoy. And I enjoyed the history. And with every history course, there was always a paper, which meant you had to do a lot of research. And I really enjoyed doing research. And I think that more than anything else led to my writing. I can't say that I'm a journalist. I wish I'd had the opportunity to go to the Grady College and learn about writing itself. But I'm pretty good at researching, and I'm pretty much of a bulldog coming to writing because I'll keep writing and do it over again and hopefully get it where I think it's good. In any event, because of that, the research, and I guess that I ended up getting a master's in history. And so I've always enjoyed history, enjoyed the research, and coaching. It was only natural that I would be asked to write a book. Most of them early on I did with other people, but then I started branching out because I have a lot of different interests. I travel a lot and still enjoy traveling because it stimulates my interest in history. And by doing that, I just developed an interest in different things. For instance, in traveling, we'd go to some of these wonderful museums, and I would come back and ask myself, what did I see? Then I said, I really need to take a course in art history. So I came back and took a course in art history. So I've said many times, one of the great things about living around a university, if you've got a curiosity about anything, you can satisfy it. And because there's an expert almost on everything. So I have always enjoyed, even when I was coaching, to audit courses, not during the season, but during the off season, in history, military history, leadership, anything that might stimulate me and get me ready for the next campaign. And I have done that over a long period of time, in addition to art history, as I just mentioned. I've taken some religious courses, And we'll get into this later, but I even was going to take one course in gardening because I was always curious about trees and plants, and that led to something else in more detail. But nevertheless, because of that opportunity, and because of the fact that I have traveled so much, not only to foreign countries, but in the United States, and particularly to battlefields. Mm-hmm. I took my grandson, the first grandson, to every major Civil War battlefield in the United States. So I've always had an interest in history. And this particular book that you're referring to is something that I've had in my mind for some times. I've written other books before that. This is the latest book that I've written. I wrote a book on gardening, and we'll talk about that later. I wrote a book on 34 of Georgia's most memorable plays. And then I wrote a book on the history of the University of Georgia with Steve Penley, who did the illustrations in the book. So I've always had this particular book in mind about a local individual. And writing about a local individual makes history come alive even more than normal. And the local individual is a fellow named Will Deloney from St. Mary's, Georgia, who, because of a background, he was the son of a planter, he had an opportunity to go to the university. He became a first honor graduate at the university. He was so good as a student that they brought him back as a professor, and they only had 9. So all of these things were happening right in Athens. And while he was teaching at the university, he got his law degree. And in the meantime, he meets this lady from Savannah that he falls in love with, and they start corresponding, and they were able to keep all these correspondence. There's almost 200 letters in the Harvard Library between the two of them, both before they were married, after they got married and built a home here in Athens, and then after he went off to war as a colonel in Cobb's Legion Cavalry. And I did it with a fellow named Sam Thomas, who was the curator of the T.R.R. Cobb House. And we spent actually 5 years of research. I went to practically every battlefield that Deloney was in, and he was in 50 engagements, and some big and a lot of them small and skirmishes, but certainly all of the big ones that I travel, because it makes history come alive when you walk in the footsteps of history. So anyway, with that background, we started doing the research, and it took us 5 years, and it was a great joy when it was over. I always think about what Churchill said about writing a book. He said, it starts out as an adventure. You get very excited. And then it becomes a lover. You actually embrace it. And then it becomes a tyrant. And you wonder why in the world you're right in the middle of it. You've got all these things everywhere. And why did I do that? But then in the end, it becomes a joy. And after it's over, it's a joy. So this book has been a joy to me because it's more important because it's local. You can go to the Presbyterian Church here in Athens today, and you'll see his name on a pew, for instance. When he was here going to school, he stayed at the Taylor Grady House, which is one that's used so often for weddings, and which has a marvelous history. I know the exact spot where they built the house, which was almost directly across the street from the arch. So all of these things make history come alive, and that's kind of a overview of the book.
Well, we don't get too much into it because I know you want people to go read your book, so we won't spill all the secrets.
Well, I'm going to tell you one other thing.
Please do.
How it ties in and how research just opens doors for you. Deloney has 2 great-granddaughters. One lives in Richmond Hill outside of Savannah, and she had a bunch of papers and of which we have now turned over to go with the papers that are already in the library, the Hargret. And the other great-great-granddaughter ended up marrying one of the players on my national championship team, who was there doing 3 SEC championship teams. His name was Mike Steele, who later on became a colonel in the Rangers and was a decorated hero. He's been in Afghanistan, Iraq, and he was in Somalia in that Black Hawk Down. He was company commander, and his troops were caught in that battle. So here is a great-great-granddaughter marrying one of my football players, and they have 2 children, boy and a girl, and both of them are West Point graduates. So it must be something in the genes. Well, anyway, that's the exciting part of research, of coming up and finding these things.
Well, that's an interesting kind of bit of history tying itself together for you there. As someone who does research, or a lot of research myself, I'm interested in your methods of doing research. How do you approach it? How do you approach taking a big subject, tackling it to find out all the details? What do you do? What resources do you use? How do you go about doing that?
Well, you start with the basic things. Obviously, that now the internet has so many things that in the past you didn't have. You had to go to the library and go through the card file back in the old days, which when I was writing papers, that's the way we did it. So you started that way, and then as you research, you come across something out that stimulates your curiosity and said, well, I got to go find out more about that. So that leads you to something else, and then when you get to that something else, that leads you to something else. Mm-hmm. So it's almost a never-ending process. In fact, I think one of the biggest problems sometimes is, when are you going to stop? Because there's always something out there that you are not quite sure about. Case in point, we finally finished the book after 5 years, but there was a key person in that book that wrote so much about Cobb's Legion, and he loved Deloney. So he was quoted very often. And we never could find a picture of him. He was served under Deloney. He turned down an opportunity to be a lieutenant in another unit in order to be a private under Deloney. So Deloney was loved by his troops. I mean, he's a great leader. He was always out front. As soon as we finished the book, we found 2 pictures of that particular fella. Wally Howard is his name. And so I don't know what we're going to do. We got these pictures. But there's an example of, you never quite finish, you never quite get it all, but at some point in time you have to stop.
I know that feeling well. How did you come across the story of the Deloneys, though? How did you come across this particular
Well, I was
couple?
reading a book by a fellow named Kent Matheson Brown, a historian from up in Lexington, Kentucky, and he had written about the retreat from Gettysburg. And he had done, in the retreat, Deloney had been injured on the 2nd day of Gettysburg, a terrible saber cut in his head. And so he was in the ambulance train that was 7 miles long. It was, 17 miles long. There were 7,000 Confederate casualties. So they were going to cross the Potomac to go back to Virginia. And they were being harassed by the Union Division Cavalry and also by torrential rain. So when they got to the Potomac, they couldn't cross. And the Union Cavalry was about to annihilate them. So they quickly formed a perimeter in which he got out of his ambulance wagon and rounded up 200 others like himself that could still fire a rifle. And they helped to form the perimeter to hold off the Union Division that would have entirely wiped the whole outfit out. So I said, boy, this guy's really something. And he's from Athens, Georgia. And he went to the university. And there's all these letters in the Hargret Library. So In fact, Kent Matheson Brown said, that's something you ought to think about doing a book on. And when I gave him a copy of that book 7 years later after he suggested that, he was thrilled.
Kind of moving on, broadening your interest in history a little bit, you're also involved in several history organizations, the Civil War Trust, and also chair of the Georgia Historical Society. How do you get involved in this? What appeals to you, and what do you do for these organizations?
Well, I am chair of the Georgia Historical Society. I was, again, always interested in history, and then I was invited to speak to the Historical Society, given the fact that they knew that here's a football coach with an interest in history and a master's degree in history. And then I was asked to be on the board. And then the next thing I know, I was chair of some committee. And then the next thing I know, I was asked to be the vice chair. And then now I'm the chair. So, but it's been fun. I've gone around the state. I've visited a lot of different places. And the Georgia Historical Society is the oldest historical society in the South. 1839 is when it's founded. And of course in Savannah, because that's where Georgia was in those early years. And so their mission is to accumulate material, to interpret material, and to teach material. I have really enjoyed being a part of that and being in that leadership role. This is my second year, and I'm ready to pass the torch when the time comes. And I'm also involved in what is called the Civil War Trust. And the Civil War Trust is now 30 years old, founded by a bunch of historians that were concerned about that Civil War land is being taken up by expansion, by sprawl, and so many battlefields, Holland battlefields, have just been decimated because of it. So now the Civil War Trust, their job is to preserve these battlefields and also to educate the public the importance of them, because it's the way you teach history, American history. And I have enjoyed my stay. It's out of Washington, D.C. And both of those nonprofits, the Georgia Historical Society and the Civil War Trust, has been named for 7 straight years in the top 2% of all the nonprofits in the country. And there's some like 7,000 of them. So they both do a terrific job. The Civil War Trust has preserved something like 47,000 acres of Civil War battlefields that would have been gone. It is so good that the Park Service asked the trust to take on the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, which we have done, and have saved some battlefields, particularly the one at Princeton, 15,000 acres at Princeton, which was a very important battlefield for the Revolution. It was almost, we were gone. Outside of Trenton and Princeton, we were about finished. The British were about to overrun us. But nevertheless, we have done that. And it's more than likely that we're going to change the name from the Civil War Trust to American Battlefield Trust, which will cover all those, and then still have the brand of the Civil War Trust under the broad umbrella. So that's been also exciting. So as you can see, I do have a lot of interest, and I'm glad I do, because once you finish coaching and being an athletic director and being as involved and focused as I've been during all that time, I'm a person that I enjoy learning. There is a great joy to learning, and I enjoy doing research. So I enjoy being busy, and that's has been a great satisfaction to me during my passing the torch on of Georgia athletics.
I should mention that you are involved in the libraries as well. The UGA Libraries Endowment Fund was something you created back in the 1980s. And it's known today as the Vincent J. Dooley Library Endowment Fund. Tell us about that. Tell me about why you created that and what purpose do you want that to serve?
Well, I've been at Georgia so long that I wanted to make a gift, and a rather substantial, at least for me it's substantial. Wouldn't be substantial for today's coaches because they have a lot more money than I have had. But nevertheless, I looked around and there were so many things I could have done. And I did make a gift to the history and also to the music department, actually the Red Coat Band. But the library is kind of the heartbeat of everything. And I have spent so much time in the libraries over my career that I thought that would be one place that would be good. And so I made a gift, and then I was asked to chair a fundraiser of $1 million that, and I put together a committee. I made my gift, and not only did we raise $1 million, we raised $2 million. And the interest from that is now kicked off and used every year, however the library so seems fit. If it's a special collection or whatever it might be, but it is money every year that's available to the library to use, to purchase, to do whatever is necessary. And so it was fun, and it was what has been satisfying to me that two of my championship teams got together. The '66 championship team got together as a team and raised $100,000. And so the '68 championship team kind of got jealous of the '66, so they wasn't going to be outdone by that group, so they raised $100,000 as part of the overall endowment policy. So it was very satisfying, and I'm pleased that that we were able to do that.
Probably a unique situation for libraries to have championship football teams competing to raise money.
Well, I think it's great, yeah.
I think it's really great. Now, one of the things that you're most known for outside of football is your gardening. I will fully admit to not being much of a gardener, so I can't speak too intelligently about it. But just ask me how. Let me ask you how you got involved in gardening. Why? What appeals to you? What appeals about it?
As I've said before, the great thing about living around a university, and I'm trying to think. I've been 54, 64, probably 66 years of my life has been at a university. Is the opportunity of learning and the opportunity to audit classes. So I knew absolutely nothing about gardening or trees or plants or anything. So I tell people I'm an inspiration for anybody that wants to be a gardener late in life, because 20 years ago I could have told you a grapefruit from a gladiola. I mean, nothing. No background, family not involved. But I was always curious about what is that tree and why does this one turn a different color? And so I said I thought I'd take a course which would satisfy my curiosity. But one course led to another that led to another. And as it turned out, at the time that I started taking courses, there were two professors who were superstars in the same discipline. Now, it's not unusual to perhaps have one person that's a superstar in a particular discipline, but at the same time, there were two of them in the horticulture department, both in horticulture, but yet both with each having a particular specialty. One is a fellow named Michael Durr, who was the guru and known in this country and around the world as the one who has written the Bible on woody plants and trees. The other is Alan Armitage, who's done the same thing with herbaceous plants, annuals and perennials. And I've gotten to know him, and I've traveled with him. I've been to Europe twice, 3 times. I've been to the West Coast. I've been all over the country with him. And I enjoy learning because it's, I say it's good for the mind. It's good for the body because I enjoy working in the yard, and it's good for the soul. And if you can benefit in those three areas, it's good for you. And it's my golf. I don't play golf. I saw early on that I was never going to be a champion golfer. I also saw that if I was going to try to be, I may not have coached as long as I would have coached because I would have spent too much time doing it. So this is my golf, and I don't have to have a tee time. I can come leave my house and be on the green in 5 steps, and I can start working. And when the day's over, I really feel like I've done something. I've accomplished something. And I'm always learning about new plants because both of those individuals, professors, mentors, have introduced over 100 plants apiece. They thoroughly enjoy introducing plants to the public, and I have benefited from that. So again, I'm an inspiration for anybody that wants to be a gardener late in life. And I'm certainly an inspiration for anybody that wants to write a book about something they really don't know anything about. And I have done that. So it's fun, and I continue to enjoy it. And before we started this morning, I ran out and worked for an hour and a half because there was something that was on my mind I needed to get done, and I got it done, so I feel good about it.
Well, I think we're going to go out in a little while and look at some of that. So,
well, I'll show you just a few things.
Yeah.
If we go out there and I start giving you a tour, it may take an hour and a half, but I'm going to just give you a little sampling of a few things, because I've got what you may call a garden for all seasons. And I've got so many different variety of plants that anytime you go out into my garden, there's something going on. And even now, we're into the fall, and the fall is a good time because I've got a lot of plants, and I'll show you just a few of them.
Sounds good. And as somebody who doesn't know anything about gardening, you are an inspiration. Maybe I can learn after all.
Well, you play golf. Do you play golf?
I used to. I was on my high school team, but I haven't played in many years. Like you, I realized I was not going to be a championship golfer. So,
well, you might. Who knows? You might.
Might take it back up again.
Never know.
One thing I am curious about, you mentioned several times that you audited classes. How did students respond to you when you walked in to audit their classes?
Well, they respond as I've had people tell me how they respond, and I never think about it myself. But after thinking about it, I could see why. Because I'm fairly well known to a lot of the students. Even today, at least their parents will tell them who I am, or they can Google me. But when I was athletic director, not while I was coaching, I would have a tie on, and I would go in to sit in a horticulture class, and most of them are kind of down to earthy, like students are dressed, and I'd be there in my tie. And I think that they would notice it, and I think that they enjoyed it because I have seen so many of them recently that I bumped into and said, Coach, I took a course with you in so-and-so. And I've also done that in history. I've had people tell me that. I did some in political science that they have taken a course with me. And so I think that they respond and are conscious of me being there. And I think they enjoy it. Now, this is not me saying this, but this is the professor and some other people that know the students. And but I have a good time with them because I am a serious student from the standpoint of listening to the lectures, from the standpoint of taking notes. And then when the exam comes, I wish the students good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow, because I don't have to take the exams, and it's a great way to go. I mean, I have done that in my life, and it's a great way to audit courses like that.
Well, Coach, I think let's wrap this segment up and maybe head outside and look at your garden. How about that?
That'd be great. Thank
right.
you.
Sure.
Well, Jason, as I mentioned, I've got a garden for all seasons, so whatever time of year something is going on, and right now we're getting ready for the fall, and here's 2 examples of it. One is a ball cypress, and that is called Cascade Falls. And you can see that it's now turned this bronze, beautiful bronze color. And incidentally, I like weeping plants. In fact, this whole area is along a creek that I call Weeper's Creek. So I've got a lot of weeping plants along. I used to say when I was coaching and we'd get beat, I'd come out here and weep with the weepers. But right next to that is a Japanese maple. And I love Japanese maples. I must have 150 different Japanese maples. And there's an endless variety of form, shape, and color. And this is a big one that I gave to my wife on our 40th anniversary. And it's just starting to turn. And before it's over in the next 2 weeks, it'll be a brilliant red. And there's a lot of them around with orange colors, yellow colors, red colors. There's just an endless variety of them. But this is just 2 examples, and I'll show you 1 or 2 others in just a minute. Well, Jason, in the fall, we do a lot of entertainment, particularly recruiting. And so we planted this row of camellias. This is the Sasanqua camellia, which blooms in October, November, December. And so I've got a whole line of them here. One called Pink Snow, and then one is a red one called Yuletide, and they go right on down. I've got a whole row of these, so when people come down, these are in bloom during that period of time. So again, this is an opportunity to see where this is a garden for all seasons. Something is going on all the time as we stand here in November, in the fall, when we used to do a lot of entertaining and recruiting. Well, Jason, this is a mini Japanese garden. I always enjoyed Japanese gardens. I went to Japan on several occasions. But this came about maybe from that saying that necessity is the mother of invention. Because what happened, we had a drought about 5 years ago. I had to dig a well, and after it was over, it was the ugliest looking pump you can imagine. But I've always loved the Japanese tea house. So I had a Japanese tea house built to cover the pump. So you can come have tea with me in the pump one day. But in this little mini Japanese garden, I've got some mini plants. Actually, this plant right here is a white pine. If you can imagine, white pines get to be 70 feet tall. But this is a mini white pine called Mini Twist. I've got a bonsai Japanese maple sitting right up there, which is also turning its color. And I've got a lot of little mini plants. There's another Japanese maple. So this is just another example of just having fun in the garden. And this is my little mini Japanese garden.